think Jack and Elon are making now, which, they came out and said delete all IP law. Why do you think that they might take that position?
I think it's always easy for the people on top to call to remove hurdles that might be in their way, right? For example, in the case of Elon Musk, he, with XAI, he has a big interest in being able, for example, to, continue to train on all content without needing to worry about IP or potentially leverage technology. I'm not trying to blame them. It's just like they kind of chose to ask for forgiveness rather than for permission because it was a lot easier. We're obviously very much focused on AI because it is the biggest thing of our generation, and IP is at the very core of it.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City. Today, we are chatting IP, intellectual property. As you probably have already seen if you watched Coinage before, there is a blockchain wholly dedicated to solving this issue, backed by a few different players in the space, including Andreessen. Very interesting to kind of dig into what has become a large issue, not just for creators, but the entire entertainment sector, and now increasingly the entire AI sector, as both Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk declare war on IP. Not an overstatement. And I'm excited to dig into all this today with our guest. Andrea Mattoni is the president over at the Story Protocol Foundation. Andrea, good to have you on Coinage, man. Good to see you.
Hey, Zach. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone that's watching. Very meaty topic. So looking forward to this.
Very meaty indeed. And no doubt very close to kind of similar to what Coinage and what we're doing here at Trustless Media, kind of trying to figure out a way to tokenize ownership over IP using our DAO co-op structure and everything that we've built here at Coinage. I think increasingly, as perhaps a lot of people expected, this war was coming. And whether it was ChatGPT, using articles from publications, whether it was everyone kind of giblifying everything a couple weeks ago, it's becoming pretty obvious that there are going to be some battles to be had. And I guess, the way that you look at things, Andrea, at Story, that's kind of why you guys came about, right? For those who don't know, just maybe start with the idea around Story.
Yeah, actually, the idea around Story, I'll give you the TLDR because I know we want to talk about the meaty stuff. But the idea about Story was exactly that. It started as us wanting to create an IP franchise that everyone else could build on top of. And we wanted to put it on chain, similar to how also Coinage is embracing on-chain tokenization to democratize access to stuff. But we quickly realized that the legal system and what we wanted to put on chain were not very compatible, and so we decided to create a protocol. And the protocol, that we call the Proof of Creativity Protocol, is what regulates all of the IP asset registration, the licensing, the royalties, disputes, like everything that has to deal with IP is part of the protocol. And then that led us to wanting to deploy it, and we quickly realized, well, if we deploy this to different chains, then all of that state is fragmented. And if I want to compose multiple IPs together, right? Let's say I create a remix with different artists, and those artists are IP assets on different chains. Like we're gonna need to create a bridge or some form of higher order state, right? And I'm sorry if I'm getting a little technical, but I'm just trying to explain what led us here, right? And so that led us to think about, okay, we need to have a network that's purpose-built for this. That's a single state that potentially is a layer that, assets, living on other chains can still have their IP on Story. Mm-hmm. Because that's where the true multiplier effect comes in, is it's not just about registering your IP, but it's also about being able to lean on others' IP and build on top of them, right? And maybe combine multiple IPs together.
I think that's kind of, it might seem like old news now, but weirdly enough, again, it's always interesting to kind of think about people who are deep in the sauce, whether it's the crypto sauce or the AI sauce. It's not new to them. Of course, we saw this whole huge ass trend of everyone giblifying everything using ChatGPT just a couple weeks ago. And it sparked a lot of conversations around exactly what you just described in terms of you can build in a silo, and you can build something that maybe no one else kind of wants to touch or use or replicate. And, again, it's something that I think some creators are pretty strict on. And, the idea of anyone profiting off of your work is something entirely different. But the idea of maybe emulation, perhaps the highest form of compliments, is emulating your work. And so just want to play a little bit of what we heard from Yat Siu, big name in Web3, and what he said about Giblification, and then get your take as well. Here's what he told us just a couple weeks ago. We participated as well. We were Giblifying things.
The whole Giblification was interesting because there was a whole raft of people that came out and said, this is awesome, this is great. And there was a whole sort of slew of other people, particularly content creators, were saying this is terrible. But imagine if Studio Ghibli was going to launch a new movie, maybe even pre-sale it in the next 3 to 6 months. Do you think it would sell more now or less?
Definitely more.
There's a thread there worth pulling on, which is that things of value, and money in particular, being social, and effectively money is essentially a social currency of form. It only has value because it's shared across. So in fact, the distribution of money and the fact that it's in everyone's hands is actually why it gains power as well.
So let's talk about that and loop it into the broader point that I think Jack and Elon are making now, which, they came out and said, delete all IP law. Jack said it first, and then Elon kind of roped in, and now a lot of IP lawyers are kind of, I don't think it's unfair to say, freaking out over what that could look like. But how would you use the Ghibli example as maybe one to show how story could have been leveraged or could be leveraged in the future to kind of insert itself in that and, maybe help creators?
Yeah. I'll start with that, and then I think it's definitely worth commenting on the delete all IP as well. I think when it comes to the Studio Ghibli example, there's like 3 layers that I think about, right? There's like being able to declare your IP, being able to detect it when it's being used, and also being able to enforce it, right? And ideally, you want to have all 3. So how can story help in this scenario? Well, in the legal system today, if you have a way of declaring that you created something, when you actually enforce it in the court of law, you can get many multiples of what the damages were, right? And so there's an intrinsic motivation there to be able to register your IP and set your terms so that at least it's out there and there's no excuse of, oh, I didn't know that you didn't want this to be used for AI training. And so when you register your IP on Story, you can actually not only set your terms, your license terms through our programmable IP license, which we call the PIL, but you can also opt in or out of AI training. So if someone that's training a model purposefully ingests your content, then they are explicitly going against your terms if you opted out of AI training. And I think we're also in a bit of like a gold rush age in my mind, right? Like the gold rush of the century is data, and part of that data is IP. And if you think about it, it's a massive, massive asset class. It's like worth trillions and trillions of dollars. Mm-hmm. And so far, AI companies, for better or for worse, I'm not trying to blame them. It's just like they kind of chose to ask for forgiveness rather than for permission because it was a lot easier. And probably, arguably, and this is like more of like a, it could be considered like a hot take, but like maybe they couldn't even ask for permission. Like it wasn't conceivable today to ask for permission for the majority of content on the internet because no one kind of thought, oh, in the future, my content will be scraped and will be used.
I don't know about that. I think it's definitely conceivable that they could have asked for permission. And in fact, I think it's interesting. I kind of think it's interesting to think about ChatGPT specifically, right? In terms of why they wouldn't. If you think about game theory, right? It's like, let's do this and let's build up ChatGPT to where it's now bigger, maybe not fully apples to apples bigger than Google, but it will become this huge kind of way that people discover content now, right? And if you think about now, if you're a publisher, you're kind of caught in this weird camp where it's like, well, now we're kind of screwed. And it's the same thing that happened, by the way, when Facebook came around. It was like, all right, well, do we want to be discovered? Do we want to have an audience or not? And so tech ate the plumbing, for better or for worse, for kind of outlets, right? It's like, okay, we got to play this game. And then completely kind of shifted things. And you even have X kind of hurting links, and now you have like this inability to then use the platform to have eyeballs go to publishers. And so I think it is all interesting when you consider that now ChatGPT, again, kind of in a stronger position because they didn't ask for permission, now can be like, well, do you want discoverability or not? And so here we are again in this new iteration. And so that's where I do think it is kind of interesting and why it's important to highlight what you described there in terms of opt-in, opt-out. But it's almost as if they have all the power yet again. And so I think that's kind of at least where we came from, right, in terms of coinage and the idea of what position are independent creators, and you can make the case that someone working at like a HuffPost or something or a New York Times might not exactly be independent creators because all the IP is owned by those publications. But what might it look like if you create what we have at Coinage, a completely distinct, community-owned DAO co-op wrapper around all of our content, which the people who mint our NFTs co-own with us, which I think is an important distinction, because now we can use Story to kind of put our IP on chain and see where that goes. I raise all that because I think, to your point, the discoverability aspect, and I want to talk to you about what you guys announced recently, which is, first, I guess we'll talk about the platform, the IP portal, because I think, weirdly enough, having a location for people to go to and discover IP that is essentially up on a platform where they could pay to use and leverage, I think is kind of interesting in the sense of it helps to discoverability because people might not have even known about it potentially being there. Rather than starting scratch, they can go and say, hey, we might want to pay to license some IP. So talk to me about kind of why this news you guys announced in March kind of helps Story's mission of doing the things that you just described.
For sure. And by the way, just to like clarify, I was in no way defending the behavior that these AI companies have done, right? So like what I've tried to kind of hint at is if there had been a way where asking for permission was as seamless and as easy as asking for forgiveness, then everyone would have been in a better position, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the whole purpose of why we're building Story. But yeah, the IP portal really is a way to help exactly that, do exactly that. Now, anyone, regardless of whether you're a developer or not, you can go to the IP portal, you can register your IP, you can set your metadata, more or less as easily as uploading your image to your favorite social network. Not only that, you can set your license terms. We have some templates, some common templates that you can choose from, or you can configure your own license, including opting in and out of AI training. And then once it's registered, it's out there. And as you were saying, Zach, once it's out there, it also becomes a distribution channel. So, if an independent creator, whether they're trying to look for a cool character to add to their webtoon series, or whether they're trying to look for a character to add to their story, or find a cool image to print on a t-shirt, they can find that IP on the portal and seamlessly be able to license it without needing to even ask for permission, right? Like they can just click a button to mint a license and they can run with it. So in the case of
Oh. No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, I feel like, Trustless Media has a lot of IP, but I do feel like the most valuable IP you have personally, Zach, in my opinion, is the custom Zoom background, where you're serving yourself your own pizza. The animated Zoom background.
That's a deep cut, man.
I don't know.
I don't know if
thought
about that in a while.
Seen this.
I'd have to bring that up. That's a deep cut, man. That was from the pandemic when I was back at Yahoo, just trying to entertain myself. But yes, I'll try and bring that up to bring that back to the people. But I do think it is an interesting discussion to consider, around the things that Story are trying to do. I wonder if you have a take in terms of, you guys have had some pretty big announcements with large kind of A-list celebrities, and we can run through those too, because I think those are important as well, just to kind of give, as you said, the total addressable market of IP when it comes to those people, very large. But when it comes to kind of the experiments now taking place in crypto, I don't know if you saw yesterday, but Base kind of launched their Basis for Everyone meme coin. There was some blowback in terms of price going up, price going down. And Jesse and the team there are very focused on content creator coins, which is tokenizing specific either blog posts or images or whatever, that's content specific. Whereas I feel like Story and what we're trying to do might be more aligned in terms of IP really only exists, and there's IP is pretty large, so it could be like a model, or in my brain just thinks about content. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm like, yo, we're like 99% models, and you're talking about the 1% that's over here that's kind of sexy,
no,
but not really.
Content is very important.
Yeah, and so like I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about which one's right? Like pursuing, and maybe they both are pursuing like content specific, like a blog post as a token, or something that's more like big, which is Coinage's IP as a totality is wrapped in our DAO, and like Pink, whatever the K-pop stars that you guys might work with, like those ones are big too. And so let's talk about that.
I think my personal take on this is that I feel like meme coins and just general coins that crypto has kind of created organically are in a way like a cry for help of trying to have something to represent IP, right? If you think of meme coins, most of them are based on an IP, whether it's a character, whether it's a concept, whether it's a, like a photograph of a Shiba Inu, or whether it's a dog with a hat, like that's all IP, right? And of course there's a huge, underbelly of that IP that as we all know, kind of influences how that coin is used. And I actually feel like Coinage is a great example of something that's on the other side, which is, okay, we actually want to use this crypto primitive of being able to create a market for anything, to involve people to actually create a, like an actual DAO, right? Like an actual open community that anyone can become a co-owner. So just to summarize, I feel like being able to register IP and tokenize it and access its revenue streams addresses some of the organic behavior that we're seeing, or that we've seen in the past couple of years. And I'm not going to say that there's like a wrong or right way to do it. I feel everyone, like the beauty of crypto is that it's open, and so anyone can choose to do whatever they want. But I'm definitely more on and to answer your specific question around like, hey, is it the whole thing that's an IP, or is it the specific content? I think it can be both.
No, I would agree. I think we're probably on the same page in terms of it could be both. Which one works and wins out depends on kind of the factors that go into it. I think, what we're trying to do will live or die by, whether or not people care. And that's kind of how markets go. And, we never guarantee success or that we're going to moon, certainly. We could die, we could not. And I think the cool thing about it is that, like, that's the way that business normally works. And I think weirdly in crypto, we have a lot of projects like don't die, and it's because, they weren't real to begin with. And so like they can go up, they can go down. But I think that it's pretty fascinating to kind of dig into which one will win. And maybe they both will. But I think you and I are probably both on the same page too, where we both say that what Jack is trying to propose right now might be the wrong way, which is this tweet. I want to bring that up. It's just delete all IP law, as we kind of talked about here. I mean, why do you think that might be the case for someone like Jack or like Elon, that they would take a position like that? And maybe as a follow-up question to it, I think it's been pretty funny to kind of watch some of the reactions. Look, I certainly don't want to attack a publication like IP Watchdog. But I do think it is funny to think about their position on this too, which is you can't get more wrong than saying delete all IP law. And of course, for a site like IP Watchdog, I assume this would be their position. But why do you think that they might take that position?
I think it's always easy for the people on top to call to remove hurdles that might be in their way, right? For example, in the case of Elon Musk, he, with XAI, he has a big interest in being able, for example, to, continue to train on all content without needing to worry about IP, or potentially leverage technology. Again, this is just my speculation here, but like being able to leverage technology without having to give anything back to whoever has that patent or whatever. And I think the underlying premise of this is a hurdle and therefore we should remove it is a bit of a myopic view, right? Like a lot of things would not exist today if we didn't have IP law, right? Like why would Disney put all that effort into creating these beautiful movies or Pixar back in the day, like they were hits, or like all of our favorite characters, all of our favorite franchises, all of our favorite content. Like, even just, why would journalists spend time creating content if anyone can just copy it and use it as their own? And so it's really missing the whole point about why IP law exists. Now, what I will concede, what I will concede is the current IP law and the current copyright law is definitely not well suited for the age that we live in today. Mm-hmm. That I absolutely agree with, and I think we need to change it, and I think we need to rebuild it, or at least improve it, right? So that it can operate at the speed of the internet. Yeah. But one metaphor, right, is like, okay, traffic lights cause cars to stop, so let's remove all traffic lights. And it's like, well, it's not the traffic light that's the problem. It's like, if there are no traffic lights, cars would start crashing into each other, right? And so you really need to think about, okay, like how do we remove traffic lights without causing cars to crash on top of each other? And the answer would be, for example, is, well, if cars are autonomous and they have perfect reaction times and they can immediately, optimize themselves and network among each other to kind of seamlessly weave into traffic, then we could remove traffic lights without having too many issues, right?
But like the Autobahn, some sort of the Autobahn, or a yield sign, or a traffic circle. There's a lot of metaphors to build here. I don't know if necessarily the traffic lights are the problem per se. Maybe, and certainly there may be some drunk drivers in this metaphor as well, in terms of just abusing the law.
Well, that's why cars have to drive themselves, right? Like,
well, that's another whole piece of this too that gets very interesting in terms of AI and who owns what, where this goes. But one of the elements that you hit on there, I think, is important to highlight too, right? In terms of how the value accrual mechanisms happen. And this is something, we've had Jason on the show before. We never really dug too deep into like tokenomics of all this, but it's something that I wouldn't want to overlook either, just kind of given what has played out this week. We were chatting with Mantra's co-founder around their huge collapse, and no one really saw it coming. But it's almost like, I think some of this, like you said, in real world use cases, the pendulum's starting to swing back to like, well, maybe we should think about tokenomics here. And so when it comes to stories, the way that it's built, how does the story protocol start to integrate some of that piece? Because like you said, as more of this gets automated, I do wonder kind of if it's worth digging into some of that, or if you guys have talked more about it as of recent, because you guys are still pretty early. I think, what was it, February that story
went live? We've been on mainnet for a couple months now.
Yeah.
I think the beauty of crypto is that everything can become a market, right? And markets have a way of becoming efficient, and so being able to turn something that is archaic and slow and bureaucratic and has lots of unnecessary layers into more of a efficient market is definitely going to help speed up the traffic, going back to the analogy, and without necessarily removing it, right? And so where the token comes in, right, is obviously governance. Is being able to, this is a decentralized network, so being able to participate in the governance and being able to help evolve story. For example, hey, like a proposal to introduce a new form of licensing parameter, or for the more technical people, like, oh, we need to potentially evolve the consensus mechanism. Like, those are all ways in which you can participate if you have some IP, right? Then obviously the security, or proof of stake, and then to actually write and transact on story. So using IP to register an IP asset, to mint a license for an IP asset. Those are the three main ways in which the token comes in. But then there's also some more interesting, let's say, IP specific use cases. Like, we have the story attestation service, which is because we as Story are a decentralized network, so we can't like just as IPs come in say this is a good IP, this is a bad IP, this is a good IP, this is a bad IP. We really wanted to find a decentralized way to tackle it, and the Story attestation service is I think a pretty interesting concept that I was actually behind creating, which is, what if rather than what if there was a collection of signal providers to attest to the validity of the IP. And we started with infringement detection.
Yeah.
So we are working with different service providers like Pex.com, like Yakoa. Whenever an IP is registered and has commercial terms attached, it gets processed by these independent service providers, and based on their output and based on their decision, there is a output that says this asset could be infringing or not. But that concept could be extended to identity. It could be extended to attribution and provenance. It could be extended to real world linkages with data. Like, for example, when an artist dies, right, the copyright of that content has a limited time until it's right, it gets released after 70 years, for example, right? So those are examples in which the attestation service could really help link this decentralized network to more real world inputs and signals.
Yeah, I have wondered about that because, for a lot of people, like you said, for Prince, there is a huge estate battle around who owned what around Prince's works. And of course, Prince probably has some lawyers and probably thought about that before he passed. And so, that's a little bit different than maybe some of the average people out there, including, as you mentioned, my Zoom background that existed from before. I don't know who this passes to. We've got it now. I don't know who it passes to when I die in terms of me bringing myself a deep dish pizza. But it was a thing. And it was a thing that existed. And I think there's probably a lot of IP for a lot of people, but most of it doesn't necessarily matter until it matters. And so I do think it is interesting to kind of have that thought exercise for people in the world of AI as it kind of grows, what happens to some of their own IP. And I guess on that point, Andre, it becomes kind of like, what are the inflection points, at least as far as a crypto project? As we learned, it's kind of like, okay, how much will we be seeing in terms of activity? And I feel like what this Mantra collapse has exposed to everybody is that, like, there's always this constant battle of, like, can we reach demand at a certain point? And maybe Ethereum's kind of going through this too in terms of their roadmap, right? It's like, will eventually people be building on us the way that we thought they would 4 years ago when we designed our tokenomics and planning for, like, how much usability might be there? And I feel like that's something that each project building the space has to make a call on when they design their tokenomics and decide to raise and figure all that out. So I guess I didn't ask this of Jason last time he came on, but what does that look like in terms of where you're expecting to be, as much as you can say, in terms of usability on Story and what that looks like, maybe even this year? Maybe we just start there, but kind of where you want to be in the future.
Yeah, I think it's also worth looking at where we are now, because that also helps give a signal as to where we're going. So even today, it's only been 2 months since we've been on mainnet, but already independent creators are earning money on Story. So one independent creator has earned $5,000 in the span of 24 to 48 hours based on their IP. We've one of our ecosystem projects, Aria, has been tokenizing and bringing on chains some of the most valuable and famous songs in the world: Justin Bieber, Blackpink, BTS, Selena Gomez. If you go to ariaprotocol.xyz and you go to their asset page, you can see a whole slew of artists. We're also there's a project called Emergence by David Goyer, who's one of the most prominent people in Hollywood around. He was behind the Dark Knight trilogy. He has a series on Prime Video, and he's working on creating a collaborative universe as well on Story called Emergence. So, like, it's definitely, our top of mind priority is making sure that the world's best IP is brought on Story, as well as enabling anyone that probably up until today could not have considered to even think about registering their work as IP, to easily do it in a couple clicks, right? So both sides of that spectrum is like, okay, anyone now can register their content, whether it's an animated Zoom background or whether it's one of the most popular songs in the world. And with this new primitive, which is this IP can be programmed on, so you can, like, create logic around, you can compose multiple IPs together. Like, what new experiences can be created from that? And I think that's also what's really exciting, is like, okay, it's not just about converting everything that already exists into the digital version of everything that already exists. But it's now that you have this new primitive, like what can we create? And we're already seeing some inklings of that with some of our ecosystem projects. And like what's to come for the year? I think aside from all of this programming IP and bringing it on chain, we're also starting to have some early discussions with governments around the world to connect as much as possible with our IP systems. We're obviously very much focused on AI because it is the biggest thing of our generation, and IP is at the very core of it.
I think that's part of the strategic bet, at least from an outsider looking in. And again, I should maybe state too that, like, candidly, as you guys got launched off, our validator arm was in the mix here, which again is maybe something to highlight in terms of people who might have story tokens looking to stake somewhere. That's out there. As always, you can learn more at Coinage.media, kind of learn how to stake and support. Those rewards get split and come back to the Coinage DAO, help us produce shows that we have and help us operate. And so I think it's kind of a cool way to align our viewers' interests with our own, and also support you guys as you kind of get off the ground. But I think highlighting all those and bringing it back to kind of what we've done, we as creators, I always get this wrong. It's always reversed. Over my shoulder over here is our play button. And it kind of, we've played around with this, kind of being a little bit cheeky with our Giblified image that we created with Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk to kind of tie in our own play button meme coin, which we launched as well. But I think that kind of speaks to the point, Andre, which is that, like, all of this stuff could be copied. And when we launched play button, the meme coin, there were, even before ours began trading, because we were talking about it, about 100 or so fakes that had begun trading before ours even did. And it's almost the same thing with kind of IP. It's like, look, anyone can copy a lot of the IP. As AI gets better, all of this stuff is going to be copied. But like proving authenticity, as you just described, I think is going to be increasingly more and more important. Some of the projects I think I remember Polygon trying to do something similar, or even like a Fox News blockchain collab that existed. I was talking to someone on that team before, where they were trying to do the same thing in terms of attestations. But I don't think any protocol has tried to do what Story has done, which is squarely brand the protocol around one use case, which is somewhat unique in terms of tackling the problem of IP. Is that reason mostly because, like you just said, AI is here and no one has really figured out how to do this fairly?
I think so. I think the problem space obviously doesn't just include AI, but AI right now is the most all encompassing, right? And I do think there is appetite. I was listening to Sam Altman and his recent interview on TED around. They basically asked the same question, like, "Hey, like, don't you think creators should earn something back?" And I think AI companies do recognize that right now we're in a bit of a transition period where, okay, we've created these models, but this is not sustainable. Like, if we keep going like this, there's going to be no incentive for anyone to create anything because AI can just replicate it in an instant. So if we want to create a sustainable AI environment where models can continue to be trained and improved in the long term, I'm not talking like months, I'm talking years and decades, then there needs to be a way for creators to get something back, for Studio Ghibli to get something back when millions and millions of people are creating images based on their hard work. And I'm sure that whole craze, has beneficially impacted them in other ways, as the clip that you played. But I also think that there's a lot of other equivalent, creations happening that have not gotten as much media attention, where that wave of recognition is not as prominent, right? So it's important that even the smaller content that is used as inspiration also gets something back. And the only way to do that is to create an economy around it. And to do that, you need to be able to attribute, you need to be able to credit, you need to be able to have terms around how to reward back. And it's not something that Story can do alone, but it's something that, like, what Story is building is a necessary component to make all of this happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the elements that, again, are getting somewhat tricky to police, and perhaps that's why we've seen Jack Dorsey and Elon lead the charge on just getting rid of traffic lights, to use your metaphor. But I don't know. I think it's become a very interesting chapter of kind of where we are, and again, how quickly all of this happens. I think, to Yat's point, it is kind of, you can build something and then not share it, and then there's no real community or interest around something. And I don't know. I think for independent creators specifically, that becomes more and more interesting in terms of how quickly some of those things can spread, and how much easier it gets. I mean, similarly too, if you play it out, how do you see things shaping up? I haven't asked you this before, but how do you see things shaping up in this space if you accelerate, because it's moving so quickly, even just 5 years out? It's pretty easy to consider. Last year, I think it was, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Tyler Perry, saying that we don't need studios. He was going to build one, I think, in Atlanta, where a lot of production happens. He's like, actually, we're going to hold off on building the studio because seeing AI makes me believe that we can just produce movies without anyone. And if that happens, and happens a lot quicker than people expect, then it becomes, I think you're looking at two options. One where the studios own all the IP, and that looks very scary because then all of a sudden they put literally anyone in Hollywood out of work, and all they do is they own all the IP. Or it could, maybe if you guys are successful, enable a way for completely, independent, and maybe if we're successful too, creators and fans owning things together to use the IP that they both love to create something and own it together, which I think can be really cool, or the former can be very scary in terms of the only people making money here being huge ass studios. And so how do you see things shaping up in maybe the next 5 years?
So I think just to be very practical, you're a reporter, right? And what I see happen all the time on Twitter is someone posts a video of a recent event, and it's comments of reporters asking, hey, can I use this for CNBC? Can I use this for whatever channel they work for? What if instead of having to do that, right, the default becomes, as soon as I create something, maybe it's automatically registered, and all of the channels that I use to publish this content have this information of it's registered, and here are the terms for it, and anyone else that wants to use it can immediately access those terms and get permission to use it. So I think it's really creating a layer of, I'm gonna be very long-term thinking about this, right? I believe that every piece of content on the internet needs to have some form of not a QR code necessarily, but some form of an equivalent of a QR code where there is that connection to what it is as an IP, right? Because only then can everything else that consumes that content know what the terms are and how to use it. And so I feel like we kind of need to, the internet needs to have IP become a raw unit, right? A bit like now when a browser supports PNG and JPG and RAW or WebP, there needs to be some also new way to parse IP and be able to link out to what the IP terms are. And so ideally, when you load an image on a browser, you can access its IP terms and you can access its license terms. And likewise, when you upload an image to any other social network, you can seamlessly set your terms and have them be out there so anyone knows exactly what they are. And I think sorry.
I just think that the discoverability piece, and again, I asked the question because it's again very different in terms of what this technology will do for whether you're a journalist in those places, like you said, because I have been a journalist in a larger organization like a CNBC or a Yahoo before, and how AI impacts those create very different decisions for management and people who are running with the IP of those brands and the journalists within them versus independent journalists who are running with their own IP. That became part of the reason why, to be honest with you, I jumped ship over to building with our community and having Coinage be a community-owned outlet, because I really do think it's almost as if we're going through the same revolution that happened with the mechanical revolution of who owns what and where is the value being derived. Is it the actual physical labor of humans sewing clothes together, or is it the robots who are coming to do that too? If you're the owner of the factory, you're chilling either way. But I think we're seeing the same thing play out right now. So it's a fascinating conversation to have, and fascinating to consider how Story is here to kind of insert themselves into all this. But we are at time. And Andrea, I do want to say thank you for coming on, because I think it's very important to have these conversations when you have the likes of Jack Dorsey or an Elon saying delete all IP, to not have perhaps the discussion we just did and say, hey, is that potentially problematic? So thank you again for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and so glad to see that you're thinking about this, and the world is not all just abolishing what makes the world tick. Like IP is a necessary form of protection. It's a necessary form of incentivization, and we shouldn't remove things just because they're inconvenient. We should make them more convenient. Like that's what we're trying to do, and so you can have best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, and important. And I'm sure as you guys have developments out this year, we'll be discussing a lot more of those on Coinage. But for the time being, thank you again for coming on. And thank you, everybody, for listening. That was Story Foundation's president there, Andrea Mattoni, joining us here on Coinage. As always, we host these conversations with the top blockchains and projects in the space. To learn a little bit more, if you haven't yet, you can subscribe to us on our YouTube channel over there. And again, if you want to co-own what we're building here with us and the co-founder of Netflix, along with myself and the rest of our more than 6,500 NFT holders, you can head to coinage.media to learn more about us. And I think that's everything we got this time. For Andrea, for myself, for everybody who tuned in, thank you again. We'll see you again soon.